morning to everybody. So today's just sort of my presentation today. My paper is just on an innovation that I've brought in specifically into my teaching and learning context. And just to give you that context for those of you in the room that are not from the School of Accountancy, first of all, good old auditing. Definitely boring, really not the most exhilarating. And of the 4 accountancy disciplines that we do have, it certainly is the last one on everyone's list and certainly is not everyone's favorite, purely because it really is not particularly interesting. In addition to that, just some of the other sort of constraints and issues we have more than 800 students registered for the course that I coordinate being auditing 2. We have a total of 8 staff members sort of on the course, 5 of which are sort of what you would classify as sort of, I suppose, teaching assistants, in that they have just completed studying, and instead of spending a year at their audit firm, they're spending a year at the university. They are sort of top students, but that's sort of who majority of the staff sort of base are. And then there's sort of 3 of us split amongst 800 students. Not ideal in terms of being able to interact with everybody. What is the problem with auditing compared to the other disciplines in accountancy? So accountancy certainly is more numeracy based. Our students' strength is often more numerical than it is literacy based, and auditing relies solely on your literacy skills. So an auditing paper traditionally is fully written, it's full sort of comprehension and application of content, and you sort of can't potentially always hide behind the calculations, which is where you feel a lot of your comfort. So it takes our students out of their sort of traditional kind of comfort zone. In addition to that, the sort of the negative feedback that we've received for quite some time now is a lot of the time us as auditing staff are not seen as particularly approachable. So as you can see, if you add all of this sort of together into this pot, the sort of boiling pot, it's not particularly student-centric. It doesn't create this sort of welcoming environment to our students. And on top of all of that, that then leads to sort of issues around assessments, results and assessments and so on. So it's really just this compounding kind of issue that we have. So obviously, there's a need to innovate. So, we really something needs to be done that's a little different. And of course, what's the convenient excuse? It's always my class is too large. How do I innovate in a class that big? Me as the course coordinator with maybe 2 other members of staff that are split amongst other years as well. They sort of often will be doing work at a 3rd year level, at a postgraduate level, and so on. How do I sort of innovate? How do I try and work on literacy skills with my students? How do I get them to better engage with content that is boring, number one? We also teach a few sort of philosophical frameworks as well in auditing too. So students are saying, well, what's the point of this? Why do I have to learn about Kantianism? I don't care. I want to be a chartered accountant and make money. It's really the sort of tough environment we find ourselves in. And, how can I innovate? How do I do this? So just to sort of give you a bit of context as to how the innovation came up, I attended a sort of a cult retreat. It's sort of 2 years ago, and I finally had my light bulb moment just staring at my timetable. This is traditionally how auditing 2 works. We run on the it is the D slot, so Monday afternoon we've got that 45-minute 12:30 session. And just to give you some context there quickly, we don't usually use that. Tuesday afternoon, we run our tutorials. They're not really tuts because my smallest class size is 80 students and my largest is 350. So the tutorial process also doesn't really work. So now you start adding that to that context I gave you at the start. Not really all that student-centric. And then, of course, because the class is so big, we can't lecture the entire class in one lecture hall. So we split them in half, where on a Thursday, half the class comes to lectures, and on a Friday, the second half of the class comes to lectures. And my mindset up until this retreat was that this is my timetable. How on earth do you innovate? Like, this is what I'm constrained with. And then, of course, what happened was sort of I had the breakthrough, and I always credit Fiona and Greg for introducing me to the concept of resilient pedagogy, Laurelard's conversational framework, and realized that I need to step out of this mindset of, this is my timetable, this is the content I need to teach, and so on. Very accountant-like, but that's my box and I stay inside it. I needed to step outside of that. So what happened, the innovation sort of came to mind was looking at this timetable and saying, well, throw that away. What is it that you want to do to try and innovate in the subject, and then bring the timetable back at the end? So what I developed was something that I call a high performance lecture, or HPLs. And how I got there was basically maneuvering the weekly timetable and specifically using blended learning to help me maneuver it. So not seeing the timetable as this rigid structure, but as the sort of malleable sort of thing that can be moved around, and blended learning taught us that we can do this. And the innovation was that what I wanted to do was break the class down into small groups of 20 students. So you've got a group of 20 students that can sit with me or another member of academic staff exclusively for 45 minutes and just spend time dealing with a literacy problem, or a problem with technique in assessments, or a content problem, and so on, just to better engage the students somehow. And ultimately, what it really led to was these HPLs are all sort of grounded in Laurelard's conversational framework. So we let activities basically drive what we do in these sort of small sessions. Okay, and really the activity, it doesn't have to be anything massive and grand. You don't need to have multiple learning outcomes. We often have one or two small, well-defined learning outcomes that drive the session, because it's, again, 800 students, put them into classes of 20. There's only so much you can do, but at least you're doing something. And effectively, what then happens is the week now flips from what it looked like to what it now looks like. 12:30 to 1:15 on a Monday, we put together asynchronous tutorials, sort of videos, where the students can sit down, they listen to these videos. Again, they're engaging videos. They sort of take the students briefly through the tutorial for the week. Asynchronous, so the students can listen to it in their own time, but obviously the time is made available to them during that slot when they should be in a lecture or doing something auditing related. They can sit down, and for 45 minutes, they can engage with the TUT for the week. The Tuesday afternoon, instead of being in the tutorial, what they now do is they can work through the content for the week that's sort of online and prepare for the activity in the HPL. So they engage with the content, and the content that they're learning in that week relates to this high performance lecture. So you get the time to sort of work through some online content, and then of course engage with whatever activity it is that you're going to have to prepare for the HPL. And on the Thursday and Friday, we then break the class down into these tiny little pockets for 45 minutes in each lecture slot. They will then sort of engage with a member of the auditing department. And very importantly here, that session is facilitated. So it's not a lecture. I know I use the term high performance lecture and probably should change that, but effectively the member from the auditing division is there to facilitate. So we don't actually sort of stand up and start teaching in the session. It's the students drive the session. It becomes very student-centric. All right, the pedagogies, just take you through quickly. Resilient pedagogy, LCF, Laurelard's conversational framework, blended learning, but also a bit of inclusive pedagogy as well, where there's also this need to break down these negative perceptions about the department. So to try and change the manner in which instruction is given was at the heart of this innovation. It was to say, just standing in front of the lecture hall and regurgitating auditing content is not working. Large lecture halls are not working. Let's break it down into these smaller sessions that are activity driven to change the manner in which instruction is given. And just to take you through an illustrative example of all the stuff that I'm just sort of talking about and going on about. So the very first high performance lecture that we ran and run now in Auditing 2, it was run last year. And then of course we've run it again this year, just due to the sort of positive feedback we've obtained. Is the one module that students have to do in Auditing 2 is these ethical frameworks. So Kantianism, they learn about consequentialism and so on. And what we sort of did over sort of COVID was that we got the Wits School of Philosophy involved, where they put together online lecture videos on each ethical framework. And they really are brief and informative. They were fantastic fantastic and really a great source for our students to engage with these philosophical frameworks. However, what we saw, the students just did not want to engage with it. So no one engaged with no one went online and watched these videos. And just before assessments, if you tracked Ulwazi, you would see students quickly jumping on and trying to listen to videos and figure out what was going on. And the problem was that this content was tested in every assessment. And then very importantly, forms the basis of something that accountants have, which is called our code of professional conduct. It drives our ethical behavior. And as you all know, ethics is a major issue at the moment in the profession. So this is something that sort of affects these students all the way up to one day when they're standing out in professional practice. So it forms that foundation for them to understand ethical behavior and so on. So ultimately, we've got this poor engagement. It leads to poor results in assessments, frustration with the course. We certainly do not have a great perception out there. As I said, just from a pedagogical perspective, the fundamentals not being in place, so not knowing the sort of fundamental elements behind ethical behavior and how our code as accountants of professional conduct was derived from these ethical frameworks is missing. And of course, that poor foundation leads to poor application of the accountant's code of professional conduct. And we see that coming through in assessments as well, where students battle to apply this code of professional conduct. You ask our students an ethical question and the wheels fall off, which is not ideal. We're not saying they're unethical. There seems to be an issue around their ability to apply this content, and that there are flaws in their understanding, as well as there are flaws with regards to the way that it's sort of engaged with and so on at other levels. But one of the issues is right fundamentally at the start, there's sort of this poor engagement with the fundamental principles. So what we then did to try and improve this, so to try and build on this and get our students to better engage, firstly with this content, just in the first place, engage with these ethical frameworks, was that on the Monday, we put out these videos. They dealt with sort of a topic on corporate governance and so on. They worked through it for 45 minutes and they've had their tutorial for the week. On the Tuesday, in that sort of 3 hours where they're supposed to be in a tutorial, they could work through each one of the videos around the ethical frameworks, as well as what was presented to them was an ethical dilemma. And they were told that they've got this high performance lecture on Thursday or Friday, where they're going to have to come in and they're going to have to debate whether what this individual has done in this dilemma is right or wrong. And the dilemma was something quite interesting where, we've got a husband and wife that are both chartered accountants and they've traded inside information. And their justification for doing so was that, doctors can prescribe their children medicine and save money that way. So why, as an accountant, can't I then use the information I've got available at hand to me to better myself? But anyway, that was the dilemma presented. The students didn't know in what ethical framework they'd have to sort of frame their argument. That was presented at the HPL on the Friday. So on the Friday when they arrived at class, or on the Thursday, they were then told, right, you've read through the dilemma. I'm the facilitator. I'm just telling you that today, the one Thursday session, you use Kantianism, the next one it's consequentialism, utilitarianism, you name it. Half the class, or half the small group, 10 students, decide to one side to say why it's morally right, the other half why it's morally wrong, and they debate. And of course, the facilitator is just there to then facilitate the debate, to make sure that obviously we don't get off topic, and then ultimately bring everything together. So there's a bit of discussion, there's collaboration amongst sort of group members. That also, these lectures are random, they're randomly allocated, so you don't always necessarily have your friend in there. And ultimately what we're there to do is to show them that, the right way to go about thinking about these ethical issues is what is right, what is wrong, weigh up the facts and circumstances in relation to the framework, and not just sort of anchor bias yourself to an argument to say insider trading is wrong and this is why. To bring through both elements of the discussion, and ultimately it's not the conclusion you reach, but the way in which you get to that conclusion that matters. That being said, as I said just now, what was the purpose? Again, by facilitating the session, it was just completely different from the way auditing had ever been taught. And it broke down those barriers of sort of that traditional non-inclusive teaching method and instruction, and became a little more student-centric. what we saw was that in these high performance lectures, because now, for example, it was me in a small room with 20 students that were able to sort of just discuss and debate and collaborate together. And I was just there to facilitate. It sort of broke down a few of those barriers. It broke down some of those negative perceptions, because it wasn't this scary person standing at the front of a lecture hall shouting out content. It was now you're sort of engaging in the smaller environment on this different level, which was fantastic. So the results, we have sent out surveys and got some of the data back so far on last year's HPLs, and are in the process of gathering data on this year's HPLs. The first thing that was so important, just sort of from our perspective, was that the HPLs improved the negative perceptions about the department. It broke down, that we're sort of these sort of scary bureaucrats sitting behind closed doors that are unapproachable and unpleasant to deal with, because you got to engage with every member of the auditing department in this small environment, in this very sort of non-hostile environment. It improved these perceptions. And we've certainly seen that through engagement with students as well, where students are now more willing to approach us, even in a massive lecture hall, to ask questions, to come up to the front and talk, to consult with us, and so on. And it's largely due to sort of this more inclusive environment and these more student-centric activities. And really, it's fantastic, because again, through creating that comfort in sort of these smaller sessions, it's broken down all of that sort of intimidation kind of factor. We're now in a large hall. You've met me on a personal level, you've met another member of the department on a personal level, and you're also more willing to now engage in these larger lecture halls. And if you're not comfortable, you've got these smaller ones, you can approach me one-on-one. I'm sort of a human being now, I guess. So just to conclude, like I said, broke down the negative perceptions, which was fantastic. What has also happened, which was great, and I think it's something that I'm always very big on, is that it's not just sort of the outward reflection, solving the student sort of aspect, but also did it teach anything inward looking sort of to all of us as a department? And what we saw was that the fact that sort of auditing staff members were facilitating the session using these activities, they became more approachable, but also sort of more human, which is fantastic. So that was the comment which I really liked, was that we just became more human, because really, it was comfortable to engage with us, but also it's improved our teaching and learning methods. So, the feedback from my own colleagues was that, some of these activities I've now taken back just into my tutorial, for example, or into my lecture hall, to try and better engage my students and so on. And really, ultimately what these activities did was made students feel more included and a part of the process, rather than sort of sitting on the periphery, which is fantastic, and bringing everybody in together. Ultimately that's really where this element of inclusivity has really come from, and really helped break down these negative perceptions, which from our perspective is just something really fantastic. And that really brings me to the end of my presentation. Hopefully I didn't put you to sleep, obviously I'd love to take questions and so on.
Thanks, Gary. There's a question from Prof. Grayson in the chat. If you want groups of 20 with 800 students, there must be 40 groups. How do you accommodate so many groups?
Sure. So that's where we use that lecture time. So you, as you said, you still got 40 groups. Each sort of 45-minute lecture slot is for a different group. So it effectively becomes what is it? You can sort of see. Now I'm trying to do the calculations offhand. Ooh, as an accountant, it's dangerous. But that's how you sort of get.
We have. How's it, Gary?
How's it?
I'm just one of Gary's colleagues. So we have 10 staff members then per group.
That's
so
right,
we'll have 10 Thursday, one 45-minute slot, 10 Thursday, another 45-minute slot, 10 Friday, 45-minute slot, another 10 Friday. So it does, like Gary said earlier, it's everybody in the department, our assistant teaching staff plus our full-time lecturing staff, then makes themselves available to do these HPLs.
Yeah, and that's how we then do it. Yeah, thanks, Tals. Thanks for that. Thanks.
Tamsin, you've got a question, please go ahead.
Hi, Gary. Thanks for your presentation. I have actually two questions. Have you considered the use of student tutors in this process? Is that something that you found won't work, or is it something that you just haven't really considered? That's my first question. And my second question is, what has the impact been in third and fourth year? Is there any way to roll this forward into third and fourth year? Yeah.
Sure. So just onto the second sort of question, what we have seen is just so number one, students sort of ask for it, but we've also implemented in the way that we sort of address certain problems in auditing. So it seems to sort of be a nice way of rolling it forward. The exact complete effect we haven't quite measured just yet. We're hoping there's some kind of effect, but we'll see. And then, sorry, your first question just about sort of our teaching assistants and so on. I think it's a really I actually really like the fact that they also get involved. I don't think there's any issues around them being there. I think it also makes everything a little more relatable. Also, there are 4 of these high performance lectures throughout the year, and you rotate, so you get to kind of meet everybody as you go, which I think, I'm not sure if that answered your question. Sorry, the first question.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean 80s. I meant student tutors, like we use at second year for the other subjects.
The student tutors, yeah.
Student tutors. So do you still have contact tutorials then, or is it just in the week of the HPL that you don't have it?
Yeah.
Okay.
So just for the week of the hub, we don't use them. I mean, maybe it wouldn't be a bad idea to do it as well, because it might sort of help in their learning process as well to re-engage with some of the content. But that could help break the groups down even further if we needed to.
Thanks, Gary.
Cool. Thanks, Tamsin. Thanks.
Thanks, Tamsin. We have Nora Lee with a question, and then we can go through the chat after that. Thank you.
Cool.
Thanks, Shane. Hi again, Gary, and thanks again for another really great presentation. So I'm thinking a little bit about yesterday morning. I think it was Prof. Osman talking about the institutional responsibility that is also, has to be factored in when we think about student success and so on. And I'm wondering, based on that and what you were saying now, if you could say a bit more about either the strategies you used, the context that made it possible, where an individual realization that you had and an individual plan that you developed was implemented across, several lecturers and possibly other disciplines or subjects. So that sort of collaborative implementation from a very individual retreat attendance and realization. What was that process, or what facilitated that?
Yeah, well, I think firstly, I mean, as you I think you popped in the chat, I always do plug that retreat, because it really it just changed my mindset in terms of not seeing the sort of rigid sort of structure anymore. And I think it does talk a lot to resilient pedagogy, where you can't think in this sort of rigid way anymore. You need to sort of, and I think it certainly did that. What we've tried to do with it was, it's also opened up for me, as Shane sort of said at the start, is that it shifted my research focus as well, where, I've taken the idea back to the school and said, look, I've tried this. It's produced a bit of research, which we're not particularly good at the School of Accountancy, but it brought up research in an educational space, which, we always do great things. We're always kind of innovating and trying something different. And what I learned from it, and the advice I've taken back, is that I tried something different, try to write about it, and it sort of took off quite nicely. So why don't you do the same thing? And what that's tried to create, and it's very slow, because it's sort of it's also still early days, but there's a bit more of a shift now where a few more individuals are starting to do a bit of research and a bit of educational research, which has opened up, I suppose, that kind of collaborative sort of element. It's also led to, sorry, I was doing a presentation before this that you were in around the Lego project, was that it led to some of the ideas I used here we used in Lego as well. So that's sort of the element that is brought through. And then also, very importantly, like I said, what's great just from us as a team, from our perspective, is that it's changed the way in which we were sort of doing things in tutorials and so on. We also saw what innovation can bring to the space. There's been other innovations we've implemented. My colleague Talia talking now, that sort of mentioned, raised the point now, she's also brought in other innovations into her subject to see how can we do things better at a postgraduate level. So that's sort of that element that I think it's sort of opened up, and yeah, that's the one area that we've sort of managed to do all of that. Yeah. Cool, thanks.
Thanks, Norali. George, go ahead, please. George? You see you load your hand. Okay, can we go to the...
Is it George Ecole or another George?
George Ecole.
Oh, sorry. I think I touched the wrong button, but I have a question though, accidentally. Is there some accountancy software that students are exposed to in their computer lab or during the course of their accountancy? I know some computing is getting in the mix already these days.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure of that. I know we, Linnell, yeah, sorry, I don't know if you want to maybe jump in. Yeah.
So just we used to teach, have students do a project on pastel accounting. We haven't, we've stopped doing that. And they're working on some other areas in this.
We do bring Excel into it. That's the big
yes,
one. Yeah.
we use Excel, you know, that's where they've been exposed to. And I think we also have a course now where they do some kind of data analytics kind of things as well. The principles, most of those programs are fairly user-friendly to use. But yeah, it is something that we should maybe look at seeing again, that there's just not a lot of space within in the degree to get all of that kind of thing going. Belinda, I don't know what they're doing second year.
Thanks. Yes, I just wanted to add, so there is in second year a course dedicated to, so that IS2 dedicated to data analysis. So yeah, they do get exposed to that quite a bit. And then, as Gary said, in terms of the use of Excel, especially in projects throughout our degree, they have to deliver some of that in Excel, but that would be the extent of exposure. Tamsin?
Sorry, I know Zakia is also on here, but there's also a third year level interaction with SIFT Analytics, which is an analytics software. So I'm not sure what the reason for your question is, George. I don't think we don't teach something like SAP, or we've moved away from pastel as the benefit just wasn't really there.
Yeah, and SIFT is way too expensive also.
No, I wasn't actually targeting any particular software, but I was just being cautious that after their graduation, they are likely to be exposed in all sorts of frames of work, and they need to be just versatile. That's all I was aiming at.
Thanks for that. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary. There are two questions in the chat.
Yes.
One from Laura. Do students engage with the course readings alongside the videos on Tuesday to prepare for the high performance lectures? Are they given guide questions to support their reading?
Yes, absolutely. So in that first example I gave, we present the dilemma to them, and then they've got to think through each one of the frameworks they've listened to as to how it potentially could apply. And yeah, absolutely, that is given all on the sort of the Tuesday beforehand. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask if you do any collective annotation, if they do group annotations using tools like Hypothesis. This is something we're working with a bit in humanities. Colette Gordon is doing a big project on that, where students are required to work on a reading together. It's just something to think about. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that. Thank you, Laura. Yeah, we don't, but yeah, that certainly is a different way of doing things.
Great. Thanks.
Would you mind? Yeah. Please. That would be great if I could. Yeah.
Okay, another question is from Harriet. Do you think Do you think you taught ethics as a value or as the correct answer to ethical questions? Because we want to figure out how to, I suppose, engage. We want to figure out how to, example, teach academic integrity as a value rather than as knowledge. Gert, I don't know if you want to expand on that question, or should Gary just answer now?
Well, that's integrity and ethics are really values, they're not knowledges. But so it's quite possible to construct a question, an ethical question, to pose a dilemma and to know what the right answer is and to memorize the right answer. But that doesn't change the value. And so we get with plagiarism, for example, we get people understanding exactly what plagiarism is and what it isn't. But they'll still plagiarize because they haven't acquired the value. They just know what they may not do. I was interested, especially in your profession. That we can tell some stories, right?
Yeah. Well, I don't even need to tell them. I think the media do a good job of that as well. But look, it's I don't really know. The intention certainly is to rather teach it as a value. I think, as I said, the whole, because you can see it straight away in the answer that's always given whenever asked an ethical dilemma or discussion or debate, is that students will always attach themselves to, well, this has to be morally wrong for the following reasons, instead of sort of weighing up both elements, what is good about it, what is bad about it, and through that, hopefully teaching them more the value of it rather than just jumping straight to a conclusion. That's sort of more the intention behind it. I mean, what we did see certainly just from results in general, if you just measure the assessment results compared to the prior year, was a certain improvement in the writing of sort of almost ethical discussions and debates. Whether we achieved that, I'm not too sure. Hopefully we did. Ideally we would love to, but yeah. Thanks.
Gary, may I add to what you've said, if you don't mind?
Yes, yeah, sure.
Sorry, Gerrit,
Sure.
I'm also in the same school as Gary, and I know I think Gary spoke in his presentation about the debates that they did in the HPL, and we've also done similar debates in financial accounting subject in terms of the degree in second and third year. And I think the key thing we tried to do there in our ethics debate that we did, is to not have a correct answer. So to make it a case study where there really isn't, this is the correct choice in this scenario, that there really are benefits to different stakeholders in the scenarios, and then to also force them to take on a perspective that's not necessarily their own perspective in these debates. So that is something that we tried to do, I think, that Gary is also doing in his debates. So I think that's the one place where we try to look at it more from a value than just the correct answer. And then also I think it's very much re-emphasizing everything that we do in our degree. Every time we have a formative assessment, every time we have a tutorial, we say, oh, remember, think about what would the ethical implications be of X, Y, and Z. So maybe that's just part of it.
No, absolutely. Yeah, thanks. And I think that was the last sort of just point to add there, is that it's one of the major reasons why the facilitator was there, to ensure that the discussion didn't become sort of emotional or became sort of my point of view. Rather, what are the facts, what are the circumstances in line with whatever framework you're arguing it from. So, yeah.
Gary, could I just maybe also just add one thing small? So we, from a fourth year perspective, we had a philosopher come in. He's with one of the accounting firms, and his background is philosophy, and he is there within the firm to kind of help to get the right kind of attitudes and things going. And I don't think so. Ethics is something people can understand what they should and shouldn't be doing. Everybody's got a totally different perspective. And his comment was, it's the culture within the organization that really makes the difference. And you do it through a top-down approach. And so I think a way maybe to kind of like instill ethics in the students is the way in which we handle the opportunities where there is academic integrity issues. And I think that the university has started to make kind of inroads into that. I know within our own school, we have a whole committee on it. We take it a lot more seriously. We try and educate the students into it, and for them to see, because it really all depends what context you're in as to how people will behave, even if there is a specific code of conduct and things like that. And I think that's why we have these codes of conduct and things for in our profession and things like that, is to say this is what you should be doing so that people are aware and they try and get them. Some people will be doing it and some people won't. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges of that whole ethical dilemma and how to get people to act ethically, because of and the different frameworks that there are, as a way to look at it. And one of the ways that he said is looking at it, how does it affect other people as well as myself, and looking at that effect for good and various things like that. And I think that's what helps to influence it.
And thanks, Sonal. Thank you for that.
There is another question from
Yes.
Nora Lee. Are you intending to publish a paper on this in addition to the Lego paper?
Yes. So we've got the Lego project, which as a team we sort of would ideally like to start, moving it forward and producing a bit of research out of it. With this one specifically, I've sort of started out sort of just as a book chapter. There was a book on just rethinking the future of sort of commerce education in South Africa, which I've sort of I've got a chapter in there about this principle around HPLs, as well as certainly an intention to get a nice paper out of this, if not maybe two, but yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And then lastly, Prof. Grayson, I don't know if you want to come in, but I think your comment there about the book that you came across, would you like to just share some insights?
Yeah, sure. So it's a book that came a long time ago, I think in the maybe late 80s. It's called Women's Ways of Knowing. So Perry was the guy that did the kind of seminal work on ethics. And he worked exclusively with white males, mostly from pretty privileged backgrounds. And he set up these situations where the students had to choose it's right or it's wrong, it's black or it's white. And so this study was done, as I said, I think in the late 80s, with lots and lots of women. And their various ethical dilemmas were presented to them. And a couple of things came out. One is that they didn't see things in black and white. They didn't want to be forced into it's right or wrong. It depends on the circumstances. And it's not like there's these alternatives only. So the classic one that Perry talks about is a man has a very sick wife and she needs medication and he can't afford it. So what should he do? Should he let her be sick, potentially die, or should he steal the medication? Those are the only two options. And the women said, those aren't the only two options. There's all kinds of other options. Yeah. Don't pin us down. Yeah. And so it kind of changed the discourse of how do you think ethically? How do you look at other options? How do you look at context? And I think that's tremendously valuable. And I think you were alluding to that. And the other thing that's really interesting is with the males that Perry studied, the metaphor in a lot of the law stuff is about it's seeing. So you talk about blind justice is good. Double blind peer review is good. And the whole metaphor is about vision and blind so that you don't see, so that you don't take an individualized, humane, personalized, contextualized view. Whereas the women were saying their metaphor was not vision, it was voice. And a lot of what they were talking about is we don't get heard. We want to have a voice. So I think it's a very interesting book, and it's very interesting to include in the conversations around ethics.
Oh, no, absolutely. No, thank you for that. Thanks, Diane. Thank you. The book itself, I think it's in the chat. Is that right?
It's called Women's Ways of Knowing.
Women's Ways. We'll definitely have. Yeah, thank you for that. Thanks.